Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to all members of the House. I'm very honored today to rise in my place and introduce 4 great citizens from my home community of Yarmouth. And one very special one of the group is my granddaughter, Megan Hurlbert, and her mother, Shelley, and her grandparents, Rick and Paulette Goodwin. I'd ask them to stand and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Welcome, the Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make reference. I know we'll get we'll get to the advisory committee stuff. I wanted to make reference to the acknowledgement of my honourable colleague mentioning the responsibility across the board that I certainly respect and would reiterate.
Order, please. We've reached the moment of interruption. We'll recess debate for approximately 30 minutes.
Reach the moment of interruption. We've reached the moment of interruption. The subject of this evening's late debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Halifax-Clayton Park. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Government consult with the fishing industry, the federal government, and seal conservation societies to put forward a plan for the safest, most humane form of seal population control. The Honourable Member for Digby, Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to stand here tonight and speak about the seals in their water. And first of all, I want to say that I'm not going to speak about the seals in the Gulf, which has gone from 2 million to 6 million. I want to speak about just the gray seals that are around this province, and that they've gone from 40,000 to 450,000. What's happened to this seal population, we're not too sure, but we know it has grown. And these seals, Mr. Speaker, are 1,000-pound animals that are out there, 450,000 of them. 1,000-pound animals. Now, if you just want to imagine, if you had 450,000 moose running around Cape Breton Island. Now, you think about that one for a minute. And you would understand better what we have. Because the people, I believe, that are not out in that ocean do not understand what this is all about. Simple as that. And I wish that they could. I truly do wish that they could understand this better. And I've talked about this a few times, and it seems to be hard to get it across to the people who are never out there and never see this. They see this little picture of a little seal, a little cute seal, on a page of a paper. And I love animals, Mr. Speaker. I love animals. I think the world of animals. I mean, I think the world of a little mouse. A little mouse. Mr. Speaker, every one of us in this room, everybody in this province has set a trap and caught a little mouse. A little tiny mouse. We have Disney World that uses Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse for mascots. They use them in Europe for mascots. They're cute little animals. But I went downstairs one morning and opened up my cupboard, and there's 3 or 4 little mouse, and they were looking out at me just as cute, with great big ears, but they were eating my crackers up. They were eating everything they could chew up. I had to do something. Because if I left them, if I didn't bring them the mice down, they would eat me out of house and home. So we all do it. We all set traps and to keep these mice down. But when it comes to these animals out in the water, people don't understand it. They don't understand that these animals are eating 20 pounds of fish a day. People say they don't eat fish. What do they eat? They're not eating ice cream bars. They're eating fish of some sort. And a scientist will tell you that one of these 1,000-pound animals needs 40 pounds of fish a day. But let's use 20 pounds. Let's cut that in half, because that is a lot of food, 40 pounds, but a 1,000-pound animal, think about it. To keep that blubber content built up in the Atlantic, to keep it warm, needs 40 pounds a day. Let's use 20 pounds. 20 pounds at 450,000 of them. That comes out to 2.9 billion pounds of fish a year. Our fishing industry, the people that work into it, the offshore, the midshore, and the inshore, get to catch 200 million pounds. And they're eating 2.9 billion pounds. That's a conservative figure. You can double that. You could talk 6 billion pounds and still be within what you're talking about. For years, this stayed at 40,000 animals out there. We've seen them all the time, not all the time, but 40,000 animals from Cape Breton down to Yarmouth wasn't bad. You know, no worse than driving in Cape Breton and see a moose here and there, like we do now. We keep that population down. We keep the deer population down. We hunt 25% of the deer a year to keep it at a 50,000 mark. If you didn't keep that deer population down, you couldn't grow garden in this province. We keep our rabbit population down. If you didn't, you wouldn't grow carrot. They'd eat top off every one. So we go out and we catch them, but we just catch enough to keep them at that controllable level. The seals always stayed at that controllable level because the sharks were there. And the sharks have been taken out of the water by ourselves, by the Japanese, by China. And it's let the seal population get out of hand. And it's growing. 50,000 more was just born. And these gray seals, Mr. Speaker, don't need the ice to have their babies on. They could slide on the beach anywhere and have a baby. They can slide up on the street and have a baby. They will be before long. They'll be out here in the street. They're out here in the harbor right now. And they'll be up in the streets of Halifax if it keeps accumulating. And I don't know how these fish stocks are standing inshore. I really don't. So I'm being told by the sign, well, they're not standing it. These seals are moving. They're down off of Cape Cod now. They've got 8,000 gray seals down there on an island. They never seen one before in their life there. They're seeing them out on George's Bank, 130 mile offshore, a seal. Never been seen there before in their life. They've got to go and find the food, so watch out. They're coming up these streets. I'm telling you, they'll look for food. And then you'll get your big trap out, a big mouse trap, and you'll be catching them. Now, I guarantee it. We've thrown it out of balance somehow. And all we got to do is try to use some common sense to try to get this back in balance, Mr. Speaker. It's common sense. They're cute. I don't want to hurt animals. We could have with that many animals out there and that many up in the Gulf, we could have a great resource here. If we use that resource right and just bring it down slowly, there's people starving to death in this world. And you know what's going to happen? It happened in Norway and Iceland. They got 20 years ago this happened. And I'm having a drink. Water. In Norway and Iceland 20 years ago, they took their fish stocks down, just the same as we did, or have now this past few years. And the seals started blooming. The seals were coming just like they are here. So after a while, they got so many of them over there after 5 or 10 years, 10, 15, whatever it was, the seals got a disease in them and died off. 95% died off. And once them seals died off, and there was a mess everywhere. They was all over the beaches dying. They was everywhere, a mess. But once all that got cleared up, the environment cleared it up, the fish stocks started coming back. And once they seen that happening, the seals started coming back too. So they had brains enough to realize we cannot let that seal herd get above that fish stock again. We've got to find that balance there. They found that balance pretty near 20 years ago. Iceland and Norway has one of the greatest fisheries right now in the world. They're selling them to us because we got no fish. The seals are eating them up. It's, I could go on all night. But Mr. Speaker, I'm just trying to get the point across. We're not out there to destroy the seals. We're out there to find a balance in that ecosystem again that we somehow have thrown out of balance, and we've got to find a way to bring that back in balance. And in doing so, we can start an industry here with food, with fur. Danny Williams will tell you, and I'm wearing my seal jacket the next time I come here if I can find one. And I'm going to bring some seal meat. I've eaten seal meat in Newfoundland. It's the best and highest protein that you can ever eat. And if we all ate more of it, we wouldn't be getting so sick either, because it's full of omega-3, the best in the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honourable member. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you it's going to be a little difficult to be as colourful and as passionate as the previous speaker from Digby and Annapolis, but I'll give it my best shot. I'm pleased to stand in my place tonight, Mr. Speaker, to speak on this resolution. Therefore, be resolved that the Nova Scotia government consult with the fishing industry, the federal government, and the seal conservation societies to put forward a plan for the safest, most humane form of sea population control. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the MLA for Clayton Park for bringing this resolution forward. As many of the members know, the Nova Scotia Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture has been and continues to be actively involved with the proper management in the harvest of seals. I would like to point out that this is completely different from a seal cull. In fact, Nova Scotia does not have a commercial seal harvest. We do, however, have a developmental harvest. This, Mr. Speaker, is a grey seal harvest. In this instance, most of the seal is used for value-added commercial products. The department has worked with industry on facilitating the development of the grey seal products, including pelts, marine oil, and meat products. And, Mr. Speaker, these markets are promising. Mr. Speaker, this resolution talks about seal population control, and this is an extremely critical issue for our province's fishing industry. As you know, the fishing industry is tremendously important to our economy and to our coastal communities. Whether it be fishing or processing or boat building, everyone has a stake in a healthy, sustainable fishery. We believe that seals are having a negative impact on fish stocks and creating many problems for our billion-dollar industry. Seals damage gear. They spread worm parasite in fish and interfere with fishing activities. And, Mr. Speaker, it is widely acknowledged by the industry and the scientists that grey seals are having a negative impact on the health and the quality of our fish stocks. In fact, grey seal herds have tripled since the 1970s. And, Mr. Speaker, there appears to be no danger to the sustainability of the seal population, while fish, on the other hand, may be threatened. Grey seals are implicated in the downturn of our groundfish stocks, and the fishing industry is unanimous in calling for a reduction in the seal numbers. It is significant, Mr. Speaker. It's a significant issue for fishermen, and the department supports the efforts of Nova Scotia fishermen to develop a viable seal harvest. The federal government, through DFO, also supports the grey seal harvest for Nova Scotia. For example, I understand that the grey seal population of Sable Island was not very long ago, Mr. Speaker, approximately 10,000 seals. And now we know it to be over 300,000 seals, just on Sable Island alone. An incredible increase in a very short period of time. Mr. Speaker, the industry, led by the Nova Scotia Seafood Packers Association, formed the Grey Seal Research and Development Society to explore the potential for a harvest to reduce seal herd numbers and to develop potential markets for fur meat, and oil. Mr. Speaker, ACOA approved a project for market development, and our department, Agriculture and Fisheries, also contributed to that in 2006. That year, DFO approved a quota of 10,000 seals over 2 years. Mr. Speaker, we are concerned about seafood boycotts because of the Canadian seal harvest. As everyone knows, Nova Scotia Seafood continues to offer high-quality products, and we are confident people will continue to choose our seafood. We also know that fish stocks are depleting. However, Mr. Speaker, scientific authorities agree that seals may be playing a part in the lack of recovery. Mr. Speaker, my department has met with industry on many occasions, and we continue to meet with industry and government on the best options for a well-managed harvest and population control. With regards to the seal harvest, I think it is important to note that the federal government determines the seal population control. As noted on their website, DFO has brought new management measures for 2007 that state fleets that overrun their annual quota will see their allocations reduced by the same number of seals in their overrun on a one-on-one basis the following year. This measure ensures that the harvest is managed, Mr. Speaker. As well, a number of additional measures also aim to decrease the possibility of quota overruns. These include shorter and more controlled opening periods, coordinated regional management, and monitoring plans. Monitoring plans, Mr. Speaker, at the dockside, among other measures. Mr. Speaker, the Government of Canada is committed to taking a precautionary management approach whereby the quotas are set at levels that ensure the health and the abundance of the seal herds. DFO makes every effort to ensure that the seal harvest is conducted in a safe and a humane manner. It is closely monitored and tightly regulated. As a side note, Mr. Speaker, I understand that the Canadian Veterinary Journal stated that virtually all seals are taken in an acceptably humane manner. Many factors, Mr. Speaker, such as ice conditions, pup mortality, natural mortality, incidental catch, reproductive rates are, of course, considered when setting quotas for the harp seal harvest. As well, Mr. Speaker, DFO is currently planning an international workshop to examine the effects of harp and the gray seal predation on the fish populations. While the value of the seal harvest may appear negligible to some, it is tremendously valuable to those individuals who use it as a source of income when economic opportunities are limited. Seals have been harvested for food, fuel, shelter, and other products, Mr. Speaker, for hundreds of years. This is part of our national culture and our heritage. Most sealers, Mr. Speaker, are fishermen who participate in other fisheries. The seal harvest provides them with the income needed to pay expenses such as insurance and buying new fishing gear. Mr. Speaker, I hope this information helps you and everyone in the House to understand the importance of the seal harvest to our province and many of our neighbors' economies. As I have said previously, Mr. Speaker, we have a developmental gray seal harvest in Nova Scotia that looks at all the ways to use the seal, and it is done within the means allowed by government and our government officials. And we are in consultation with the many interested parties in the population to control the seals. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to say a few words tonight.
The honourable member for Hants West, you have a minute and a half approximately.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to stand this evening in my place and speak for a few minutes on, for about a minute or a minute and a half at least, on sealing in this province. And I know that we've had great debate. I don't know, there may have been seals in Windsor come up through the Evan River at one time. There probably was, yes. Yes, there probably was. And I'm sure that the honourable member from Annapolis or Digby Annapolis would certainly be aware of whether they travel up and down that river. And maybe we'll hear a little bit about that in the coming minutes, I'm sure. But I don't know a lot about fishing. I remember fishing for trout and things like that, but I often thought, well, those types of fish were put here for a reason. Maybe the seals were put here for a reason, and we've just yet to figure that out. We do a variety of harvesting in many areas, different fish. Maybe there's a way that the seal can be harvested to be of some use or of more use than what we see it as today. We realize that there's a problem. It's creating a problem for our fish stocks. We were able to sit in committee with, I believe his name was Dr. Boris Worm, not very long ago. What a great afternoon that was. One of the most informative sessions I've ever had with regards to fishing. And it's quite easy to see. He's traveled throughout the world and very, very well informed, has studied many things, talked about any number of things. And he did talk a bit about the seals and how they may or may not have some effect on the depletion of our fish stocks. And there's many sciences out there on the seals, and I know the honourable member across the way has talked in numerous committees that I've been in, and certainly in this House as well. And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see my time is up, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. The honourable member for Shelburne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to stand tonight and talk about an important issue, particular to our fishing communities. And I want to suggest that I support the particular motion that's in front of us to consult the fishing industry in the federal government and the seal conservation societies to put forward a plan for a safe and most humane form of seal population control. And as the speaker from Annapolis-Digby, I think I echo a lot of his comments. I think I support a lot of his comments. And it's interesting to note, Mr. Speaker, that between the two of us, we have 73 years of commercial fishing experience. I'll let you do the math. I think we can basically, I think we're pretty close to each other's term. It's interesting to note that this may be a sensitive issue in a number of circles around Canada. I think it's an important topic that we should be talking about in our coastal communities. Last year, or most recently, the Fisheries Standing Committee from Ottawa made a presence in Shelburne, and they were presented with a number of representatives from across Nova Scotia, particularly the Tri-Counties, and there were some interesting pictures there. There was a picture of a 200-pound halibut. If you can visualize that, a 200-pound halibut that's resembled after you eat an apple core. This was the results of a halibut, one of the most beautiful fish, high-priced fish in our ocean, that was left on the lines of a long line, and the seals, a predator, took advantage of this, and the results was a halibut remains, the carcass looked the resemblance of an apple core. And I think it's interesting to note that the wording of this particular resolution, a humane way of controlling a seal population. And I think if you look around Nova Scotia, we talk in this House, we've talked about the problems that the pork industry has, the chicken industry, the cattle. These animals are all harvested in a humane way. We look each year and we have recreational activities. The moose hunters across Nova Scotia, they participate in a lottery. The deer hunters, thousands of animals are harvested in a humane way. And as a young man, Mr. Speaker, in the 60s, I spent a lot of my time Irish mossing. The older fishermen at the time, most of them carried a single-shot 22, and I think the member from Annapolis Royal will know where I'm going with this one, because at that time, Mr. Speaker, there was a seal bounty on seals. Our federal government paid the commercial fishermen to harvest, and they give them a reward. There was a management plan in place. And there was a balance. And the federal government endorsed that. And we, earlier, the member from Annapolis, Digby, suggested the numbers. And this particular population has tripled in the last 25 or 30 years. So I think it's very interesting that if you go, and the other key point in this particular resolution is that we're going to consult with the fishing industry. That's a very interesting point, because I hope that time will allow us that we'll be discussing the new Fisheries Act and its lack of consultation. And I look forward to that and talking about why we're not consulting with the fishermen. And I'm very confident that if we go across Nova Scotia and look at this particular issue and consult with the coastal communities, the evidence is going to be overwhelming that we need a controlled harvest. And Mr. Speaker, if I can, the earlier speaker made reference to a particular gray seal brief submitted to the Nova Scotia Legislature Standing Committee on Resources on October the 3rd, 2006 by Debbie McKenzie, Gray Seal Conservation Society, and I'd like to read a paragraph from that. And I'll quote, Mr. Speaker, from the first page, and I'm quoting here now from Mrs. McKenzie's presentation. Please understand that if we believe there was any possibility that removing seals might trigger a shift back towards the previous heyday of fish and fishermen, then we would be in favor of the plan. However, no scientific evidence suggests that this will be the case, while all the available evidence actually points in the opposite direction. And I took notice of that particular comment because actually it endorsed the seal cull if we could prove scientific evidence that there was a need for it. And I think that is a crucial part of this. And if I can take you back, and I know you may be curious where I'm going with this, but if we even look at the Bible, the Bible is a good indication about fishermen and having respect for fishermen, because that quote right there talks about giving evidence or respecting individuals. And there lies the problem, is that there's no respect for the fishermen who spent years on this particular water. And the biblical reference is that the disciples, the majority of them was fishermen. And to me, that's a good example, because if that was good enough to give advice at that time, majority was fishermen, I would think, Mr. Chairman, that if you do the consultation and you go to the coastal communities, you'll hear loud and clear that there's enough evidence from fishermen to support a seal harvest. And if you, in fairness to Ms. McKenzie, she goes on to say that she wants scientific evidence. And I challenge that, because here we are with literally thousands of fishermen around this coast. And I can give you a number of examples of fishermen that goes out and tend their trawl lines and comes back and have the apple core effect of a high-priced halibut. That is science. That individual has spent 25 or 30 years, and they can tell you to the day when lobsters will return to certain depths of water this spring. And I'll suggest it here that a fisherman once told me a number of years ago, in the shoal waters off of Seal Island and Mud Island, and I know the secret will be kept in here. On the third day of May, when I was just a young man learning the ropes, you put your traps in 10 fathom of water, and you will be on the money. 2 minutes. And he was right. That is scientific evidence. And the point I'm trying to make here today is that we look at academics, we look at people who are going to make a decision on this particular resource and say that we need scientific evidence. The evidence is amongst the coastal communities that we represent, the fishermen. That is what we represent. And it is time that we took these individuals seriously. And I can show you that the numbers will be overwhelming, that we should have a harvest. And I look forward, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude here today, to have the debate on the Fisheries Act. And there's where it is, because we need to consult with people, we need to consult with coastal communities, and like the seal hunt, the coastal communities will tell you that our Fisheries Act needs to be consulted, and they will show you the way. They have the knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all members. The time for late debate has expired, and now the House will resolve itself back into the Committee of Whole House on Supply.
We'll now resume debate and supply. I'll recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth North. It's close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know we only have a few minutes here, so I just want to reiterate my last question to the minister, and in hopes of hearing some comments, which I would insist that we elaborate tomorrow as well. My last question was in and around the advisory committee that struck up by the minister as per Section 88 of the Child and Family Services Act. My question to the minister is, can she tell me where exactly that committee is at as far as initiating a report, membership? Please elaborate.
The Honourable, the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And as Hansard will reflect the continuation of the discussion we started earlier, I would like, with my honourable colleague's indulgence, just to go back to the point that he was making earlier regarding the challenges that we face with our with some of the more challenging child welfare cases. And I think, again, to use some of the experiences that I had in the teaching sector, case conferencing is invaluable. And when we pool together the resources that come from the experts, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the social workers, and we put that together with the family members and the youth, I think that the information and the value that comes out of that case conferencing is key. And I was very pleased to hear my honourable colleague mention that there's no question that as individuals, each player has a responsibility to own their own circumstance. Sometimes circumstances are out of the control of the youth, and we recognize that. And that's when, even more so, they need our assistance, and they need our guidance and our help. But that case conferencing and that ownership of responsibility, I think, is worthwhile repeating and mentioning. I was thinking as the member was talking, there were 3 or 4 immediate components that came to my mind. Of course, there are the schools, the school system themselves, which my honourable colleague, the Minister of Education, and I have had numerous conversations about how to better utilize the time. Because when you think about the time that we have our youth in schools, it's more time than we have them really anywhere else. So that time in the school system is extremely important and valuable, and we need to maximize our resources there. And use those schools, use them to our benefit. So as we move forward with this strategy, I'm looking forward to ideas, new ideas, and creative ideas of how we can utilize our schools and the resources that are there to better serve the needs of those youth who need us particularly, as well as the family resource centres. They are an amazing resource in our communities, and again, we have them all across the province. Some of them are more grandiose in their programming and their approach. Others are a smaller scale. But I think those family resource centres are key, especially in areas where we don't have other resources readily available, other community groups and other opportunities. So those family resources are something that I look forward to expanding on their mandate and continuing to see how they can better meet the needs of those youth in our communities where it's most needed. Service clubs can never underestimate the importance, the value of our service clubs and the work that they do. So any way we can support them as a government or as members, I think is key.
Order, please. The time has expired for the NDP caucus. We'll now recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, there's a couple of I hear noises, Mr. Chair, but I'm not sure from where. There's a couple of issues that I'd like to bring up tonight before I share the rest of the time with my colleague from Cape Breton South. But the first one that I'd like to bring up to the minister is the current contract negotiations which are taking place between the employees of the town daycare in Glace Bay and the CAW. Now, Mr. Chair, as the minister well knows, this is a daycare that has just recently been, it's been around for some time, but the building itself is brand spanking new because the minister and her department...
Order, please. Order, please. I can't hear the honourable member from Glace Bay.
Most of the trouble.
The honourable member for Glace Bay. The honourable member for Glace Bay has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the department has put in, about $700,000 towards the building of that structure. And the daycare workers, there are, I believe, about 15 workers that are employed, 15 staff at the town daycare in Glace Bay. There are 94 children at the centre, and the funding, the daycare is a non-profit, and 80% of the funding comes from the province of Nova Scotia, from the Department of Community Services. Now I know, Mr. Chair, and I would expect that what the minister is going to say when I ask the question, that this is a labor dispute, this is contract negotiations, we don't want to interfere, we can't do this, we can't do that. But I'd like to hear her comments, and I'd like to ask her if everything possible is being done, especially since the province. Mr. Chair, I find it impossible here tonight to try and get a point across.
Order, please. The honourable member for Glace Bay has the floor, and I would note that it's quite noisy in the chamber, and I cannot hear him. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Chair, again, the fact of the matter is I'd like to hear from the minister what her department is doing, and I don't expect her department to interfere in this case, but I wanted to know if indeed, Madam Minister, if you put the pressure on through the Department of Labour to make sure that these workers don't walk out on the picket line, that 94 children aren't left without a place to go tomorrow.
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I welcome my honourable colleague from Glace Bay to the debate, the discussion here this evening. And I'll use my earpiece, Mr. Chair. If I can't hear him, I'll make sure I put my earpiece in.
Order, please. Thank you, and I appreciate the quietness of the chamber at this moment. Minister, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, to my honourable colleague across the way, I'll use my earpiece if I have a problem hearing him, because I know that the issues he brings forth are issues of the utmost importance to him and his constituents. And Mr. Chair, I'm extremely pleased to hear my honourable colleague acknowledge that the program at the town daycare is second to none. It's a wonderful facility. We were extremely pleased to partake in the expansion of that facility. Indeed, Mr. Chair, it was the first outing that I made as minister, and I joined my honourable colleague from Glace Bay at the event as we unveiled the plaque and look forward to the expansion. And I was pleased to have him there alongside with me, and committed to him that we would I would be encouraged to go back again, and I'd be happy to go back for the official opening, Mr. Chair, and investigate other opportunities in the Glace Bay area. But Mr. Chair, specifically to town daycare, my honourable colleague is absolutely correct in his assumption that I would stand and certainly acknowledge this is a labour issue, and that there is definitely a process that needs to be respected. And as that process unfolds, I am extremely pleased to learn that they have returned to negotiations, and that the two sides again are talking, Mr. Chair. I think that's extremely important, because I know that those dedicated workers at town daycare are committed to providing quality childcare to the children they serve. They have wonderful programs there for special needs children, as well as the mainstream programming. And I know that they were especially pleased when we brought in the operational grants, Mr. Chair, just this past month, that will be retroactive to January, that provide them with more funding to be able to stabilize the programs that they offer there. So I do have faith, Mr. Chair, that the process will unfold as it needs to between an employer and the labor issue is resolved in a positive manner, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm sure as I pretty well guessed, I knew that would be the response from the minister. You know, it's the normal response that we can't get involved because it's contract negotiations that are taking place. But I want to make sure that the minister is aware and is doing everything possible so that there are not 94 children left without a place to go. These are daycare workers. They don't want to go out on strike. They want to be there to take care of the children who are in their care. They haven't, you know, the increase that they're seeking is 2.9% in each year over a 3-year period, and what they've been offered is nothing. 0% is what the board has offered. And, you know, the board falls back on the excuse that it's 80% funded from the provincial government, and they're not getting any increase from the provincial government in their funding. So how can they afford? They have other costs incurred now with the new building, which they are deeply appreciative of, but the new building has left them in a position where they're really not sure how much the heating costs and all that are going to be, because it's the first time with the new building. So I just want to make sure that the minister is aware of this and hopefully keeping on top of it. There's another subject that I wanted to broach, Mr. Chair and Madam Minister, and that's the appeal process through your department. The appeal, and there's been 3 recent instances that I've been involved with. They were appeals that involved the Highland fisheries workers. Initially, they were denied benefits, and the reason that they were denied benefits, and I'm sure the minister is familiar with the case, is because they were locked out from their employment with Highland Fisheries, and because the case was originally determined to be a lockout, which is a labor dispute, and your policy clearly states that you cannot give benefits to anyone involved in a labor dispute, whether it is a strike or lockout. Your policy clearly states that, and that was the case at the first of Highland Fisheries. But during the appeal process, and when those cases were finally heard by the appeals commissioner in Glace Bay, all 3 cases were overturned. They were all overturned by the appeals commissioner. Darren McFadgen was the name of the appeals commissioner. And one of the reasons that was cited in those appeal decisions was that there had been independent evidence that was available to the Department of Community Services that should have been enough for the Department of Community Services to make its own decision. When I say that, the Department of Community Services at first stated that those workers were denied benefits because of a decision that was made by Service Canada, by HRDSC it was named at the time, what we all commonly call employment insurance. Employment insurance turned them down because, as your policy states, they were involved in a strike or a lockout. They were not deemed eligible for employment insurance. When that happened, that case was appealed through Service Canada. The appeals process, it went to a board of referees with Employment Canada. That case was overturned, and the appeal was allowed. However, it was then determined by Service Canada that they would appeal that decision, and that was going to take some time to get before an umpire in their appeals process. Through all of this, and before it even got to that stage, there was a letter that came from Highland Fisheries, well, actually it came from the legal firm that represented Highland Fisheries, to the Canadian auto workers. And in that letter, it clearly stated, and this was the letter that was used by the appeals process by the Board of Referees to overturn the original decision. In the letter, it stated that the company was no longer going to operate the fish plant until this year, perhaps. In other words, it was a letter that clearly stated, just not a lockout, this is a closure. And that was what the appeal was fought on, the fact that this was no longer a labor dispute. This was clearly a closure by the company. And in the event of a closure, under their rules, the federal rules, of course, you qualify for employment insurance. My point, I may be taking a long way around trying to get to my point, but my point is I couldn't understand, and I tried to make that known to the commissioner in the appeals process, in your appeals process, why the Department of Community Services didn't make its own independent decision at the time. They clearly had the evidence, and that was in the appeals process, why they didn't make a clear independent decision instead of relying on the decision of the federal department, Service Canada. And it was stated in the media, and it was stated to me that, you know, this is because it's a federal decision. We can't go against that federal decision. It's involved in a labor dispute. And I'd like to know why that was, but I'd also, more importantly, I'd like to know that since the time of those appeals, has anything changed, and are things going to change in the appeals process? Now remember, and as the minister would well know, these were workers who were turned down. They were not on strike anymore. Their union was not paying, they were locked out by the company originally. The company closed. They were not being paid strike pay. They were not getting employment insurance. And then when they went to your department, the department, as we always say, of the last resort, where you go for help, they were turned down when they arrived at your door as well, based on a federal decision, that wasn't fair in the first place. So I'm wondering if there's anything that's going to be done, or could you possibly take a look into the fact that perhaps your department and the appeal process of your department should have a little more independence in the future, Madam Minister.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And my honourable colleague, I thank him for the opportunity to discuss this. Because, Mr. Chair, it indeed was my honourable colleague who brought this to the floor of the House in the fall sitting, and spoke to me afterwards privately, and made sure that I fully understood, Mr. Chair, the reality of this situation for his constituents and for those folks. And, Mr. Chair, oftentimes we learn invaluable lessons, and through this process I have learned quite a few pieces of information, quite a few lessons, if I will, Mr. Chair. And my honourable colleague is absolutely correct in his unfolding of the events. We do, in our department, by means of policy, respect the issue as it pertains to a labour disruption, be it a lockout, be it a strike, etc. We do take that information and respect that information as it's presented to us. As my honourable colleague identified, there was then the opportunity for the appeal of those cases. And, Mr. Chair, it was indeed through our own independent arbitrator at that point that my honourable colleague is correct in stating, and we were pleased that our own arbitrator was able to make that ruling, that indeed these individuals were not in a strike position. They were indeed out of work, Mr. Chair, and so then, of course, they did qualify for income assistance. Now, I raised this issue with the federal minister, and I raised concerns about the interpretation of the policy. I certainly would not want to indicate that we would do anything that would contravene the policy as it pertains to labour issues. But, Mr. Chair, I think it's important to recognize that policy exists for the protection of individuals. And in this case, when some of those individuals did come to our department, we were able to, even though we couldn't provide income assistance on a regular basis because of the interpretation at that point, we were able to provide some emergency funding and some special need funding that I know, Mr. Chair, wasn't enough, Mr. Chair, given the restrictions of the policy we were dealing with, but we were certainly pleased to be able to do that. I do know that the member opposite is, I'm sure, equally as pleased, if not more pleased than I am, that this has been resolved and that those individuals are currently in receipt of income assistance who qualified and or employment insurance benefits as they qualify for that. The department will not be looking at those appeals. We will not be arguing the appeal ruling of the arbitrator, Mr. Chair.
I'll recognize the honourable member for Preston on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members, for allowing me to make an introduction. In the West Gallery, we have a very special group with us this evening to watch the proceedings, and it's not very often we have visitors in when we're going through the estimate debate, so I'm sure they will enjoy it very much. Actually, we have the first Lawrencetown Cubs here this evening, and with them there's 10 Cubs altogether, and we have the two leaders, Andy McKay and Rob LaPride, I hope I pronounced the names properly, as well as some parents, Michelle Bixtay, Carson Andrews, Wendy Harnish, Diana Hicks, Kathy Harris, and a very special young lady here along with her mom this evening is Haley McStay. And I would ask the House to wish them a very warm welcome and welcome to the House of Assembly.
Welcome. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When the minister was saying, and I appreciate the comments, but there's a couple of things here that just didn't sit right with me. Number one, the department allowed in certain cases the medical expenses to be okayed for some of the people who had applied but were not receiving benefits, but did give them the meds. And that to me it's not a problem, but it's sort of perplexing that if you qualify for medical coverage through your department, why don't you qualify for full coverage through your department? Okay, and in terms of income assistance, if you're good enough, if your budget or so on is good enough to meet the medical requirement, then why don't you meet the requirement for full income assistance? It took a long time to get to the stage, remember, where the appeals were finally overturned. And in the meantime, these people had absolutely nowhere to go. And as a matter of fact, what they were told by one, it doesn't matter who, but they were told by one employee of the Department of Community Services that the best place and the only place they could go right now was to the food bank. And the food bank was scared to death that a large number of people would show up because their shelves weren't stocked well enough to take on a large number of cases. Now, it's not the first time that I've been a critic of the fact that on occasion, the Department of Community Services will refer people to the food bank because they can't help out. You know, I personally have a problem with that because I feel that the Department of Community Services is the last resort and should be able to help out without referring to a food bank. However, I know there are rules to be followed, and I've stated here before, and I'll state very clearly, that you have tremendous caseworkers at Glace Bay who handle caseloads that are beyond comprehension, which is another problem I could get into altogether, but I'll leave that up to my colleague from Cape Breton South. He has that, I think, on his agenda. The fact that you've got caseworkers that are handling literally hundreds of cases in Glace Bay and elsewhere. So, but my questions and my problems around the Highland Fisheries workers were why it dragged on so long. And I know your commissioners are, I know you called them independent, and I guess they're your version of your definition of independent and my definition of independent, Madam Minister, may be two different things, okay? But I'll stretch it to say they're independent commissioners because in this case he made the right rulings. But but other than that, I don't know about that independence part because you know, they're appointed by government, Madam Minister, and you know that as well as I do. And their political stripe just usually is the same stripe as the government. Now, that may be a coincidence again, but anyway, in this case, the matter was handled properly. But it took some time. It took some time to get to that stage before it was finally handled. And I'd say the first thing, and I know that your department is your first number one priority is always the care of the individuals that go to your department seeking help. And I've seen that in many instances in an office in Glace Bay that handles, as I said, horrendous caseloads, but they have tremendous workers. They do tremendous work there. And, you know, you should be very proud of those workers in Glace Bay and of the people who are managing that office, because they do a tremendous job. But again, and just a final comment, that seemed to be strange to me, that in some cases the department, in this particular instance, in Highland Fisheries workers, would say, you qualify for medical expenses, they're covered, but you don't qualify for income assistance. And again, on the fact of why the department in the first place didn't approve that without having to send it to the appeals commissioner, because there was clearly the evidence there, and as we pointed out, during the 3 cases that were appealed, in each individual case, and the ruling was the same, there was enough independent evidence there to make a decision on your own, and to say, regardless of what the federal department is saying, that you can go ahead and rule that. And again, one of the things that was not taken into consideration was that through that federal process, when that appeal is after the Board of Referees stage and moved on to an umpire stage, you could have been looking at 6 months or more before an umpire actually visited the Sydney area to hold a hearing. So you could have easily stretched into a year without even considering it, and that would have been not necessary if they had qualified for community services benefits. After having said all of that, of course, if they get community services benefits and they're awarded their EI, they'd have to pay back community services benefits. So, in this case, the fisheries workers were made to jump through so many hoops that they became really frustrated at the end of it, and in some cases they moved on. Fortunately, in some cases they found other employment, but in several cases that I know of, they pulled up stakes and left Glace Bay and are now either working out west or in other areas, and it was all because of the regulatory hoops that they were made to go through and the bureaucracy that was there that just stopped them from getting what I, in my opinion, thought that they were entitled to in the first place. And Mr. Chair, I don't know if the Minister wants to comment on any of that, but it certainly concludes my questioning for her anyway. Thank you.
The Honourable the Premier on an introduction.
Just to be very quick, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the time. Joining us in the East Gallery, Mr. Chair, is a constituent of mine from Inverness, an individual who's very involved in her community, in the fire club, very involved in a number of organizations. Also happens to be very involved, Mr. Speaker, in the Progressive Conservative Association at that local level, and obviously a very fine, smart individual. But, Mr. Speaker, I'd like the House to welcome Bonnie McIsaac from Inverness and welcome her to the chamber here. Seat at the seat.
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank my honourable colleague. I won't occupy a whole lot of the time here this evening responding to this, but I do want to thank my honourable colleague, first of all, for a couple of comments. First and foremost, I am proud. I am proud of all the individuals who work for the department, the case workers, the frontline workers. They indeed go above and beyond. And I appreciate my honourable colleague stating that for the record. And I take every opportunity that I am presented with to acknowledge that publicly, and I know that the caseworkers appreciate that acknowledgement, because I know there are many days when they don't feel valued to the degree that we indeed do value them. And Mr. Chair, I do want to add as well, my colleague brought forward a very important concept and a very important point. Hindsight is always 20/20, and when we look back on events, we can say, well, we should have and we could have. And in this case, I know that those fine workers and those fine case workers and staff were trying to find ways to assist. And it is questionable and it is challenging. Well, how do you get special needs funding if you don't qualify? Shouldn't you have to qualify for base funding before you get special need funding? And I know that it was the compassion of the workers that allowed us to provide the funding and the resources that we did. And I know and I hope that it was of some assistance to those families. And again, we learn from every lesson, and the lessons that we've taken away from this one are valuable lessons, Mr. Chair, and I certainly commit to my colleague that we will continue to learn from those lessons and hopefully not have a repeat of this situation, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have?
11 minutes.
11 minutes this evening. Okay, thank you very much, and I've been listening with some interest to the comments of the minister to date on community services, and as I was listening, my mind was wandering back to the days. I do have some history in this particular department, and as a frontline worker in municipal government, and when I decided in 1978 to run for mayor of Sydney, I thought I was moving into a more difficult job, and the mayoralty turned out to be a walk in the park compared to the 10 years that I spent in the front lines in community services, which, by the way, was called the welfare department in those days, municipal welfare department. And then it went to the lofty title of social assistance department, and now it's moved on to community services, and I think there might have been one more in between there, name of the department. But the role of the department in the past number of years has changed significantly, and I think it's because the problems, Madam Minister, that you're dealing with today are quite different than the problems I dealt with 3 decades ago. Because in those days, it was a work problem with families with either heads of the family, be they female or male, were either unemployed or underemployed and had to access programs that the welfare department or social assistance had available to them at the time. And the result, of course, of that no employment or underemployment was social services, municipal social services, or in the case of disability, accessing one of the provincial programs at the time. As you may or may not know, municipal social services was a municipal responsibility back in my day, and there was some 52 municipal units at the time in Nova Scotia, and every one of them had a different standard. So not only did we have many problems with our own people in the city of Sydney in terms of trying to provide assistance, people from less affluent municipalities would move into Sydney to get better rates at the community services department in those days. So they all had different criteria for eligibility, criteria for the amounts of money they could access. But today things have changed in the department, Madam Minister. Now we're dealing with a recent phenomena in Nova Scotia. When I say recent, at least the past decade or so, single parent families in Nova Scotia. Most of them, unfortunately, female single parent families who are trying to cope with bringing up a family on little or no income and or again underemployed, and they have to access your department for services. And I don't think the department has caught up with the need. I believe that, or the needs that are out there. For example, a lot of single moms that I know, they're single for a number of reasons. The husband has left, or they were single to begin with and had children, or they were perhaps divorced, you know, all kinds of reasons. But the reasons are less important than the fact is that we had, for the most cases, single females, head of households who are trying to bring up their kids on very limited income. And most of them trying to get off the system to make a better life for themselves and their children. And some of the problems that they faced, Madam Minister, would be, I'll give you an example. If they wanted to go back to school, the support system wasn't there to the extent that it should be. It's starting to improve a bit, but it wasn't there. Any other income that they could derive, or any other income they had before they entered the system, was clawed back if there was any advances made. In other words, it became extremely difficult for their situation to get better. We also had the situation with the disabled in our community, which is growing. We have the situation with the elderly. All of these groups, I don't think, have the kind of advocates that they used to have in the community. As a matter of fact, MLAs from all parties in this House see themselves as advocates for these groups in trying to access benefits. And I don't think, Madam Minister, that the access to your department's resources are as available today as they were years ago. And I'll tell you, there was a hands-on, one-on-one with client and worker that doesn't exist anymore because of caseload sizes, because of the computer, because of compartmentalizing people who are told what they're eligible for right down to the dollar, and there's going to be no deviation from that. And you mentioned that on your remarks earlier, Madam Minister, and I think it's a sign of the times. In your opening remarks, you made a statement that I picked up on, is that you said the fine people who are accompanying you here today are here watching the dollars of your department. And they're very fine people, and I said it here in estimates last year. However, what is missing along there are the social workers in the department at the senior level, whose responsibility is looking after the people in your department, not the finances of your department. I think it's more important for we, as legislators and advocates, to be questioning you on what can be done for the clients that have to access your services, and not so much what can we do to save money in that department. You mentioned again, Madam Minister, about people are exiting the system. Unfortunately, they're not exiting it fast enough. I would like to be able to stand in my place in this House and say that we don't have a Department of Community Services anymore when it comes to income and that would be a happy day. However, that's not about to happen anytime soon, I don't think, in this province. Again, you know, who's looking after? I remember when I was working with the Department of Welfare and Social Services, that I reported at the senior levels of the provincial government to a number of senior employees, all at the master's or doctorate level in social work. And somewhere along the line, the focus shifted, that they were not calling the shots anymore for the department. Rather, Madam Minister, we have now, as Deputy Minister, we have a lawyer, very fine lawyer, worked in another department. She has gone up the system to Deputy Minister. I know her personally, and I know her family personally. She's a tremendous lawyer and has done great work in the various departments she's been employed with. But I just wonder about the focus of the department. You know, I would have been more comfortable had a person who come up through the system at the graduate social work level could be trusted to be the Deputy Minister of the Department of Community Services and Housing. Now, maybe that's dreaming in this day and age. Maybe we do need lawyers at the top, you know, no matter what department it is. Maybe we need chartered accountants at the top. But I maintain, Madam Minister, that serious thought should be given at the senior level in your department to having the direction of your department guided by social workers. Because that, after all, is the reason for being this department, the raison d'etre, you know. And I would have hoped that that may happen yet. I don't know. Maybe I'll convince you that we should be looking at employing more social workers and shifting the emphasis on the department to the actual getting back to dealing with clients on one-on-one basis. And, you know, we have some great social workers, as my colleague from Glace Bay mentioned, out there. We have some great workers. But we also have some people working for your department that feel it's their role to make sure that clients who have entered into overpayment situations with your department for one reason or another, and I'll give you a couple of good examples. Canada Pension Plan Awards, that money was given on the basis of waiting for that, being clawed back, EI payments while waiting for them that access benefits from your department, and then be told they have to pay that back when they get EI. Now, these are people that are scratching every week for a quart of milk or a loaf of bread or to get something on the backs of their children so they can go to school. to make sure they provide healthy meals, and then to be told that, well, you got your EI now, and we advanced you money, so you have to pay that back. You know, I mean, when your government or the previous government, when we were in power, write off millions of dollars a year from corporations, yet we claw back payments from people who are sometimes making less than $10,000, $11,000 a year, certainly in the case of some disabled people, and also being able to claw back payments made from retroactive payments or payments made by deadbeat dads through the court system, you know? I mean, when they can collect it from them. When they collect from deadbeat dads, and there are a number of them out there, when they collect from them, then immediately they're told that that money's clawed back. And it's not clawed back by intimidation or anything like that. It's clawed back right through the courts, you know, because your department has the right to have that money sent directly to them, you know, and I'm getting to that. And then when the Department of Community Services can't get that blood from the stone, you know, then they send it over to Service Nova Scotia. And Service Nova Scotia employs bill collectors that harass these people on a daily basis. And I'm telling you,
Order,
they harass
please.
them.
Order, please.
You know, for payments.
Order, please. The time for debate, committee and supply is expired for today. I would now call on the Deputy Government House Leader. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that the committee do now rise and report progress and beg leave to sit again on a future day.
The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader on government business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call public bills for second reading.
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill 146, Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act.
Bill 146, the Honourable Member for Halifax-Shabukto.
Mr. Speaker, when we adjourned debate the other day, 2 days ago, I believe I had some time left. I wonder if you might oblige me at the beginning by letting me know approximately how much time I have.
Approximately 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 20 minutes. When we finished 2 days ago, I had just started to speak about the coming disasters. I don't know if all members got the chance to look through the most recent copy of the Hill Times, the one dated March 19th of this year that appears in our caucus offices and in our mail slots on a regular basis. But the Hill Times had in it this week quite an amazing advertisement or notice. And the notice was for an event that is about to take place in Toronto this year. It's for what's noted as the 17th Annual World Conference on Disaster Management. Now just think about that for a minute. A World Conference on Disaster Management. Now, what this suggests to us, of course, is that disasters are sufficiently common that there is a whole range of professions that is oriented towards dealing with them. Now, we know, of course, that for many years we've had international organizations like the Red Cross that step in and move to parts of the world when disasters strike. Usually these are so-called natural disasters. And we know, of course, domestically that things like the armed forces are looked to move in as an aid to the civil power, as it's termed under the National Defense Act, as required. Again, usually when some things that we usually think of as natural disasters take place. And typically, what we actually encounter are things like the flooding of rivers. And this has been a common thing in Canada. But you know, the kind of disaster I have in mind here is not something that one can anymore think of as being removed from the activities of human beings in the way we have our society organized. Think only about some recent disasters that have been very large in their scale and that probably all of us are aware of. Think about the enormous oil leakage from the Exxon Valdez in Alaska. Think about the gas leak from the Union Carbide plant in Bhopal in India. Think about the enormous consequences of the failure of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Ukraine. And when you turn your mind to those examples of disasters, surely we have to realize that what we are in peril of is not simply something like the flooding of the Red River. As problematic as that is, there are disasters out there that are directly linked to our way of life that are of enormous potential to us. I mentioned earlier the fact that this bill concentrates on global climate change and therefore links our thinking to one of our vital life support systems, the air. And indeed, we have to think of it in terms of that. We have to think in terms of what it is that we are doing as human beings because of the way we have organized our society and because of the way we live or choose to live. We have to take the lesson from examples of disastrous occurrences and use what is clearly our main evolutionary advantage, the ability we have to look forward and think and anticipate things going wrong. And if we can do that, then we might stand a chance. We might stand a chance of avoiding or minimizing some of those disasters. But I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I have relatively little faith that this will actually occur. I think that there is enough potential imperilment of our life support systems, including our food supply, that there is very good reason to think that there will be many disasters that will strike us in Canada as well as in other parts of the world. We're not immune here. We're not immune. Think about avian bird flu. Are we immune from that? Certainly not. Are we immune from other viruses, things that infect the food supply? They move around the world. There's no reason to think that we will be safe from this kind of disaster, which stems from how it is that we've organized our lives. So the question is, do we learn the lessons? Do we take effective steps in order to avoid or minimize the consequences? The evidence is simply not good. And indeed, when I look at this bill, and however much I'm happy to see planning being done to deal with some aspects of global climate change, I see things that are missing in this bill. The main thing that I see missing is its failure to try to tackle something that we actually do have constitutional control over at the provincial level, which is land use. There is virtually nothing in this bill that deals with land use. And if you turn to the major statute that we have in Nova Scotia, the Municipal Government Act, which really says that it's municipalities that are to do the land use planning, we have to recognize that they carry on their functions within a context set by the provincial government. And indeed, there's a mechanism under the Municipal Government Act known as statements of provincial interest that are attached to that act that set out a specific direction for municipalities when they do local land use planning. But if you look at that assemblage of statements of provincial interest, they're not nearly strong enough, they're not nearly comprehensive enough. And if you look at the Provincial Environment Act, which also to some extent engages with land use, the direction is not strong enough. We don't have provincial level policies that tell us that we have to save agricultural land. We don't have strong provincial policies that deal with pesticides. We don't have strong provincial policies, or indeed any provincial policies, that really have much of a focus on compact urban form. When I think about what this bill has about land use, all I can find in it is a focus really on solid waste. Now, dealing with garbage is a useful thing to do, but I have to tell you, that's entry-level environmentalism. I'm all in favor of people diverting their waste, reducing it, composting, recycling, all good things to do. But you know what? We're dealing with much more serious array of problems. Models do exist for what it is that the province could be doing. Models do exist for what this bill fails to do when it comes to land use. I'm put in mind of what occurred in British Columbia a number of years ago under what was known as the core process. The Commission on Resources and the Environment was established by the BC government to be a large land use planning exercise led by the provincial government. The provincial government divided the province up into different areas and led what has become a world-acclaimed, effective and consultative group process for thinking about land use in those areas. Why don't we have a core process here? Why didn't the minister think to extend his idea of sustainability to a topic that we could move on immediately instead of setting goals for 5, 10, 15, and 20 years out? I commend to the minister thinking about examples like the core process from BC. We should be engaged in that. Why not take all of Cape Breton Island, for example, as a starting point? That's an area in which we could be doing large land use planning exercises as a part of nudging ourselves towards the basis of sustainability. Now, I know that we're a small province. I know that we have fewer than 1 million people here. But nonetheless, we can take effective actions. We can take effective actions here. And it's important that we in the West take effective actions. And the reason for that is what's known as our ecological footprint. Mr. Speaker, calculations have been done, in fact, by leading Canadian scientists, Professors Rees and Wackernagel at the University of British Columbia, on the concept of what's known as ecological footprint. And here's the question they asked. They said, if you look at each individual in our population and you calculate the rate at which they use up resources, how much land do you have to have available to support their activities? How much land do you have to generate the minerals, to clean the water, to provide the wood, to grow the food that will support this person? Their calculation in Canada is that it's about 17 acres per person. That's an enormous ecological footprint. And our ecological footprint is about 30 to 40 times that of people in India. What that means is that the population of Canada, in terms of ecological footprint, is about the same as the population of India. When you do it on an ecological footprint basis, we're equivalent populations. And you know what? Here's the other thing they calculated. If everyone in the world lived with the same kind of ecological footprint, that is, using up our resources, as is the kind of level of using up resources that prevails in North America and Western Europe, you know what we would need to support that way of life? Not one planet Earth, we would need 5 planets to do that. And you know what? We don't have 5 planets. We've only got the one. And we're using up those resources at a great rate, and the southern nations, the developing nations, are moving along at an enormous rate themselves. But because we're so far advanced, it is incumbent upon us to move very aggressively to reduce our ecological footprint. You have to remember that it's 30 to 45 times what it is in some of the very poor parts of the world. And that is what unsustainable means. Unsustainable means everyone couldn't do it. So if we're going to shift to a sustainable basis, of course we have to recognize that it's a global problem. But we also have to recognize that we have to do our part and that it's an urgent global problem. It's not one that's casual. It's in fact the only way that we're going to succeed in our quest for survival as a species. It's as simple as that. It's a question of survival. That's the term that many of our leading thinkers have used. Think about life support systems, think about coming disasters, think about human survival. Now, the minister has a crucial portfolio, and I'm very glad that he came to us with this bill. We're going to support it. We're going to support this bill. But we have to recognize just how serious it is that we engage with this on an urgent basis. Now, if we recognize that the air and the water and the earth and our food systems are crucial to our survival, then we have to find ways in order to make this sustainable. And I'll remind you what sustainability means. Sustainability means that we live in a way that does not deprive future generations of their opportunity to live. That's a major undertaking. That's something that we have to do. What are the most effective steps that could be taken? Well, recognizing the problem is the first step. Now, many of us have spoken for many years in an attempt to remind people of what it is that the problem should be seen as being. And to some extent, we've had some success. I count it as a success that now members of this House are faced with a government bill, not an opposition bill, but a government bill that proposes to set target dates for activities, for reining in many of our activities. And yet, those dates are far in the future. It's not clear to me that 20-year targets for some of the steps that are proposed here are nearly quick enough. I have great faith in the innovation abilities of the private sector. I have great faith in the scientific abilities and the engineering abilities of educated people who are able to engage with the problems and move. What the government has to do is tell the private sector that it's no longer acceptable to live the way we live. That's part of the government's role. We have to make these changes. And if I want to disagree with anything that I heard the minister say when he introduced this bill and spoke to it at second reading, it's his statement that brought out the connection between the environment and the economy, in which he suggested that if we take the appropriate environmental steps, we would become wealthier. I have to say that's not necessarily the case. In fact, most of the contemporary thinking is towards steady state economics. It's far from clear that we'll become wealthier, and wealthier is not the measure. Survival is the measure. So I'd ask the minister to go back and rethink that. I think that he'll find that if he reads economists, environmental economists like Daly and Cobb or Hazel Henderson or Paul Hawken, that there are models out there for achieving steady state. He should take away from his thinking the idea that we would necessarily become wealthier. If we survive, that will be a great accomplishment. So that said, Mr. Speaker, let me go back to my original point. We thank the minister, or we welcome this initiative from the government. We intend to support it. We would hope for much more aggressive targets. But even this is an important step. Even this is something that we do have to move ahead with. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to make some comments about Bill 146.
Thank you. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to stand here and speak to Bill 146. I, too, am very pleased that the minister has brought this bill forward, and I'm pleased that the government is also behind moving this bill forward. I am, though, concerned that this bill doesn't quite go far enough, and it certainly is missing a lot of substance in this bill. And I'm hopeful that with this good move forward, that the minister and the government will aggressively move on adding more depth to this bill. We're all very much aware of the changing circumstances within our environment, and certainly I'm no stranger to to having knowledge of those changes. And I have been an environmentalist for many, many years, and so it comes as no surprise to me that people are now joining together and finally recognizing that without our environment, without the protection that we need around our environment, that really our life species as we know it will change drastically over the next 20, 30, 40, and 50 years to come. I stand here today not only as a member from Queens, but I also stand here as a mother. And as a mother, I am very concerned about ensuring that we do have a sustainable environment, not just for my children, but for my children's children, and also for all of our members' children. And it is important that we act aggressively. I mean, we only remember just a few short weeks ago when many scientists had gotten together and finally put the brakes on or ended discussion around was it true or was it not true that global warming and climate change was accelerating across this globe. And so it was a real wake-up call for all of the people who negated the fact that, well, we still have time, our environment is not really changing, and we can wait another day to put protections in place. I'm really hopeful that the minister, as this moves forward to law amendments, will work quickly with stakeholders around his table and within the province and even outside of the province to work on really putting some meat on the bones of this bill here. Some of the concerns that I have with the bill as I'm seeing it, and some of the quotes that the minister has made around sustainability, and what comes to mind immediately is wetlands, and how we have to be very careful how we treat wetland loss in this province. We're seeing a number of our wetlands disappear. We're seeing a lot of alterations to our water courses, and I mentioned to the minister just a while ago, in fact, that when we start altering water courses, as we have seen over the years, that once you alter one water course, it ultimately affects another water course. And we haven't had in this province a real serious look at what our waterways we haven't been mapping them in a substantial way across this province because we don't know what waterways have been altered with development, which brings to mind a couple of comments that my colleague before me made, and that is the importance of land use planning in this province to ensure that we are planning for future development without harming or damaging more waterways in this province. And our coastal lines too have to be watched very carefully because in the coming years we will be faced with increasing flooding conditions and the rise of sea level and the loss of coastal land. This bill has a lot of good starting points here, but the environment, we have to understand that our environment is all-encompassing. And I personally have always felt, and I believe I had this quick conversation with the minister some time back, where I have always personally felt that the Department of Environment really should be the lead department in our political structure. And the reason I feel very strongly that our Department of Environment should be the most lead department where every other department feeds into the Department of Environment, because everything we do revolves around our environment and the conditions of our environment. For example, we can look at the growing healthcare system, the wait times, the increased respiratory illnesses, asthma on a huge increase in our youth, and other environmental illnesses. So the Department of Environment really should take the lead in working with the Department of Health in recognizing what types of illnesses are actually a direct cause from our environment. The Department of Education. The Department of Environment really should be also taking the lead with the Department of Education in looking forward to the future where we are going to need to see a number of our youth starting to be taught in environmental sciences in a way that they have never been exposed to before, because our youth, when they become our age, are going to have to be so much more knowledgeable about environmental technologies than what we are today. Our youth are going to have to take on the challenges when they get our age, when my 18-year-old son becomes my age, and I won't tell you what that is, but my youngest son and my oldest son, who's 27, are going to have to take on those challenges that are before us today. They're going to have to be leaders in the technologies of clean water and clean air and new technologies and renewable energies. And So I think it's important that when we look at our education system, we also start to include mandatory, perhaps maybe mandatory for now is a bit of a strong word, but certainly start to include many environmental science courses at an early age, so that our young people start to get well versed in the environmental sciences, because they are the ones that are going to be faced with most of the crises that we will see happening as a result of global warming and climate change across the globe. The Department of Economic and Development, I really see the Department of Environment as perhaps taking some lead role with the Department of Economic Development in partnering with them and exploring the green economy, which is very real and it is happening, and there are a number of people across this province, across this nation, and in other countries that are taking the lead in the green economy. And so there is opportunity for economic development through the greening of our province and of our nation. The Department of Fisheries and Agriculture. You know, the Department of Environment plays a key role and can play an even bigger role with the Department of Fisheries and Agriculture, and that's ensuring that we have sustainable fisheries, sustainable agriculture here in this province and beyond. One fact that came to me some time ago was around food security. And I attended a meeting several months ago where the folks that were organizing the meeting had brought me back, or brought us there, back to September 11th. And what this organization, the information they were sharing with us, was during 9/11, when our borders were closed, if our borders would have been closed for any longer than the time frame that they had been shut down, for 9 to 11 days, we would have lost the ability here in Nova Scotia to be food secure. And so I asked them what that meant. What do you mean if our borders were shut down for any longer than 10, 11 days, we would be food insecure here in the province of Nova Scotia? Well, it's quite simple. We have a food supply here coming into Nova Scotia, coming into most of our province from outside of the province. We export a lot of our agricultural goods, and that's why it's so important that we really move forward quickly on the Buy Local program. One of the reasons we need to be food secure here, because when we start facing crises, whether it's a 9/11 crisis or whether it's a total shutdown for a period of time of our grid system, we need to be able to be sustainable in our food here. We need to be looking at better ways of sustaining our agriculture, protecting our agricultural lands, and giving a boost to our farming communities and our fishing communities. Those are just a few examples of where I see the Department of Environment taking a lead role and a stronger role within government, and not just here in Nova Scotia, but all governments. And I would encourage the Minister to have a look at New Zealand's model, where actually the Department of Environment actually does have a bigger lead role. We've always looked in this province to the Department of Environment as kind of not the most important department in the scheme of things when we look at things politically from that perspective. And I mean, it's been said many times, you know, over the years, well, the Department of Environment, they're there to kind of, you know, make sure rules and regulations are followed for some things, but, you know, it's pretty lax in a lot of firm, solid decision-making. So I would encourage the Minister to continue this move forward in this vein, and I'm so pleased that he has embraced a lot of ideas that certainly the NDP has been positioned on for a number of years. So many years. In fact, that's why I became a member of the NDP many years ago, when I was probably about 19 years old. And again, I won't tell you how old I am now. But many years ago, I recognized the NDP for the strong position on the environment that they had. And I knew at some point that we would see some movement forward by other parties. So I encourage the minister to keep moving forward, and I look forward to this bill going on to law amendments. So I thank you.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Environment Labour to close debate on Bill 146.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've listened very carefully to the members opposite, and one thing I can't quite understand is how someone who's 30 has an 18-year-old son, but I'll figure that out. But anyway, I do thank them for their comments on the environment, and I move that we close debate on second reading.
Motion is for second reading of Bill 146, the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. House ready for the question? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary by nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 146, entitled An Act Respecting Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the House be adjourned to sit again tomorrow, beginning at 9 a.m. to 5. Following the daily routine, the House will go into the Committee of the Whole House on Supply.
The motion is for the House to now rise and meet again tomorrow at the hour of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary by nay. Motion is carried. We stand adjourned.